Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alumni Fellows virtual reading series here at the Hutchins Center. Today, two brilliant writers are with us. First, Nii Parkes will read from his poetry and work in progress. Then Aruni Kashyap will engage him in conversation. And finally, we will open up the session for Q&A with the audience. First, a little bit about the writers. Described as a poet of ritualistic delicacy, Nii Ayikwei Parkes is the author of The Makings of You and The G's, the latter shortlisted for the Walcott Prize, selected as a Poetry Book Society 2020 recommendation, and recently translated to Swedish. His debut novel, Tale of the Blue Bird, was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize and went on to win France's Prix Baudelaire, Prix L'Or Bataillon, and was named Best First Foreign Book of the Year by Lear. Nii Ayikwei's recent novel, Azúcar, has been described as beautiful and moving, a new kind of Caribbean novel with a reach beyond the region. His nonfiction work explores music, nature, race, writing, and the colonialism survivals of African philosophy, skills, and ways of being in Africa and the African diaspora. Aruni Kashyap is Associate Professor of English and Creative Writing and the Director of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Georgia, Athens. He is the author of his father's disease stories and the novel The House with 1,000 Stories, along with editing a collection of stories called How to Tell the Story of an Insurgency. He has also translated 2 novels from Assamese to English. He is a recipient of an NEH Fellowship, a faculty research grants in the Humanities and Arts Program, Arts Lab Faculty Fellowship, and the Charles Wallace India Trust Scholarship for Creative Writing to the University of Edinburgh. His poetry collection, There Is No Good Time for Bad News, was nominated for the 58th Georgia Author of the Year's Award 2022, a finalist for the Marsh Hawk Press Poetry Prize, and 4-Way Books Levi's Award in Poetry. And he is also the author of a novel and 3 novels in Assamese. Please welcome to both of you, and thank you for the audience members for attending. Nii, would you like to begin?
Yes, Krishna, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back, even if it's virtual. And I'm very happy to be here in conversation with Aruni, of course, later, but also to share some poetry, which even though my time at the Hutchins was full of poetry, I didn't really get to share any poetry while I was there. The work that I'm doing that comes out of my time with the fellowship, I have found takes echoes from the work I had done before. So it's almost like, because writing is a form of exploration, I had begun to find answers in my own writing prior to becoming consciously aware of what I was looking for. So what I'm doing is reading some of the old work, and then a couple of new pieces that have come since my fellowship at the Hutchins. I think the work is really concerned with an inheritance of loss, I suppose. I think because of the way that African people have been moved around the world without their consent, in many ways, there's always the hint of somebody not being where they should be, or somebody that you don't know about. And so I've been thinking about how to reconcile this loss with our engagement with joy. And so the theoretical umbrella that I'm working with for the new work is sang still, but in the middle of those 2 words, when you put them together, is the word angst. So it's kind of like loss and joy. That tension is what I'm playing with. I'll start by reading from The Gaze, which is my most recent collection. And the first poem I'm going to read is called A Gimbal of Blackness. for Pops. My poems are quite short and I won't talk much between them, but Aruni and I will talk a lot because we always talk a lot when we meet. Even when it's virtual, I'm sure it'll be the same. Night cannot grasp the swift flight of wind, but blackens every tree the air moves, paints them darker, pushes them against the light, the shapeless light that gives them shape to shift before my eyes. I am often in the embrace of night. I am myself a dark thing, the kind that was once called boy when man, that was born of a woman descended from hills, and a man delivered from boyhood by the sea. A man now lifeless, though he gave me life. I am often in the embrace of dark thoughts, in the dim grasp of memory, a bottle in hand, reflecting the light of the moon. I recall a can of Guinness left in a London fridge, one my father bought but didn't get to drink, kept for me by a well-meaning aunt, and how hard my throat shrank with every sip, how sharp that smooth black liquid felt inside me, how hard these nights that blacken me, broken with grief for a man I loved who can no longer grieve. Next poem, it's called Locking Doors. So I refer to an aunt in Gimbal of Blackness. That aunt of mine was a teacher and developed Alzheimer's in later life, similar to another teacher of mine who was Nigerian, who also developed Alzheimer's. Both of them in later years could not quite recognize me. And anyone who knows of memory loss knows what that's like. So I combined the two of them to kind of, I don't know, think about what could be the positive things about losing your memory. My Nigerian teacher had a husband who liked to bet on horses. So there's a reference to that in here. Anyway, Locking Doors for teacher and the Sundance Kid. To free the L from its perch, slide the torpedo of its head into place, locking the front door. To check the fires of the gas stove do not still burn. He remembers it is night and darkness brings duties. He holds your hand, guides you to the bathroom, turns away before you turn on him, as you do sometimes when the cache of your memories reset, making him a stranger. He can recall Grand National winners' names for the last 25 years. Don't Push It, Royal Athlete, Earth Summit, Comply or Die. Reels them off in his head while you slip into Igbo, speaking to the Canadian neighbors who share your southeastern patch of London with you, falling back gently, the way your Romanian gymnastics teacher taught you in Lagos all those years ago. And this is the beauty he holds on to. How you can recite his parents' phone number as though some magic has unlocked the forgotten idyll of your unsettled Apapa youth. You still remember him as the boy with a parting trimmed semi-permanently into his hair by a father he saw when the ships came, who brought you a cara so hot he juggled it all the way to your house, smiling as he told you that he was the one who got the first ones from the pan, first in the queue. He is no longer the man who almost gambled your lives away, who near lost his mind when your twin boys died at 15. No, he is again the boy who kissed you and ran towards sunset, looking back every 15 meters to see if you were smiling too. Next poem I'm going to read is Oscura y sus obras. It's a kind of deliberate restructuring of the Spanish form, rather than saying darkness. I made it the dark. Anyway, I'm gonna read it. 1. 3 primary colors mixed in a shallow pot. A blackness beyond the reach of a scorpion's sting. I am yet to meet the being who can unmix paint, restore the pure pigment the brush's tongue flicked. 2. For venom's cure comes from venom. From fangs jibbed like a fountain pen's nib, is collected in a hollow, injected by hydraulics. I say I am a dreamer who fills spaces with wild doodlings. I place diamonds in the charcoal of sketches, laughter in bursts of gloom. But God, who knew the power that children have to expand air, to set a ship adrift. 3. A brush might ask its bearer, which is darker at night, sea or sky? A body knows which dark swallows it whole, but will stay silent. There is a word for that. I go to bed thinking there is so much space in the world. Where are the bony legs to kick me, the questions that punctuate the black like stars? How long to fill a canvas with textures of night, without hints of blue, streaks of yellow, the ballast of its memory of sunset's bruise? 4. One day I'm in a cafe writing a poem about arachnids, sketching 8 legs because words are slow to come. A kid comes over to ask what I'm doing, his skin dark as my daughter's, his dimple like my son's. I'm trying to fill the space, I say, looking at my page, the black paint of brooding. 5. If the scene were painted again, the jibbed sail rippling gently with air, the vessel silhouetted, the sun red as a crying eye and sinking, the waters gleam, a smooth carapace. Even with what it knows now, with the pain to come, the nights vast as 3 empty beds, my flesh would still enter the damp, be swallowed by its mood until the body again moves. I'm going to read one of the newer poems. I'm going to put my thing on mute and blow my nose really quickly too. The change of weather came at a time when I just returned from Ghana, so the temperature difference just floored me. This is called Spectra, and there's an epigraph from Maya Angelou's inauguration poem. There's a line, the horizon leads forward, and yeah, so. And you would have noticed the other poem, I make these weird connections between the poems when I'm reading them. The other poem has the word still a number of times, so this starts with still. Still, with what lies beneath Atlantic waves, the unburied buried, the breaks in family trees, like a polyrhythm's beats, we move. How all the light in dust's name does not make its dark lineage not sing. Spectra. And I'm going back to the book to read Caress. 2 parts from a long poem called Caress. Parts 1 and 9. 1. If I speak often of gardening and day's slow rise behind the creep of morning sun, it is because somewhere along my thigh lies the memory of a tomato plant's jagged leaf, nibbling at my skin at dawn. Your hand steady at my shoulder, your voice gentle in my ear, pointing out tiny buds that will turn to flower, then fruit. I hold the faded watering can, its silver sharp against my grip, dark as yours, as we wade between beds of onion and kale, lettuce both green and red, aubergines that stand high as my chest. And all the while, time unfurls. Birds bicker in the guava tree behind us. Doors crack open. The light spreads, its luster caressing your tight curls as you pull a radish clean out of the soil. Shake it and bite through its red skin to the crunch of its white flesh, passing one half to me. We speak nothing, Okonfo, of origins, but I know you planted all these seeds and taught me the tender and the harsh, the art of nurturing them. And this is all I needed to know of love, ever. A morning before sun, the beauty of bud, flower, and fruit, a father's voice with birdsong, the tart white secrets of a radish's heart. 9. If I speak now of day's orange retreat and the lily white of the moon's rise, it's because one dusk a kayak will lick the face of Lake Volta, slick as a boat that once glided, a man in its belly, towards the flower of Guadeloupe. In it will be a woman, breath warm in light breeze, her dark shadow skimming ripples, island bound. You will see neither the fruit in her lap, nor the seed in the fruit. You will not hear the song in her head. It is said, no man is an island, but perhaps a woman is, because an island will bud, will flower, will fruit. An island knows a history-filled caress of a bone-heavy sea, wet and clean as glass. An island can hide rebels in its green, can feed them bread as fruit, and red flowers as liquid. An island can birth a man. I'm going to read one more from the newer poems, and then I'll kind of pause so I can chat with Aruni. I might read a couple more poems later, but you know, this is probably the most recent one. When I was, well, basically when YouTube came along, you know, occasionally these videos would pop up, and I remember seeing one with Marvin Gaye singing, and he's just kind of lying in a couch and just like hitting every note, like it was just something you do as easily as blinking. And so later I was reading an interview with Leon Ware, who's a producer, and he has a quote which is the epigraph for this poem. And the poem's title references, I'm never sure what the title of this song is, but you know, Marvin sings about the good dying young. Has anybody here seen my old friend Martin? Can you tell me where he's gone? He's saved a lot of people, but it seems a good light die young. Can anyone tell me where he's gone? Something like that. I haven't listened to a song for a long time. Anyway, so the title of the poem is The Good Die Young and Supine. Some middays, blank moments in loud gatherings when I fall from the conversation sweetening threads, gaze anchored in the beyond. I wonder if I've spent the bulk of 3 decades living where one man did not die. Places the voice of my father echoes without the pitch of keening his last illness wrung from him, where his flesh did not, by degrees, make space for air, his wrist a fraction of the circumference of his daughter's, where I might still receive a feather light blue airmail letter covered with his living scrawl, the tongue tucked into 2 soft folds, sealed with his DNA. That unwavering eye, that satirical pause, that turn of phrase that leans to song, that laugh that set every joyous gathering alight, head thrown back, a glimpse of eternal stars. I see that virtual clap, Aruni. Thank you.
Should we start the Q&A now? Is that what you
Yeah,
want?
let's start the conversation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was wonderful to hear it in your voice. You know, I read the collection. I last section I'm still about to read, but I've been reading it, and to hear it in your voice is a completely different experience. Very haunting, very beautiful. I want to start with some broad questions and then zoom in on the poetry collection. And a reason I want to start with a couple of broad questions because I also want to say that Nii's personality and the work that he has done is so much. It's not just about himself always. It is so much about being a good literary citizen. He has served as a chair of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. He serves as one of the directors or organizers of the literary festival at Brighton, and many more. And he's also a great friend of writers, not just me, but of many friends he has mentored, he has helped. So that's why I want to start a little bit broad, that he was a fellow at the Hutchins Center, of course. And so you found quite a lot of fascinating stuff, and we kind of exchanged messages or conversations about that. That definitely has helped you write this collection, but has also become sort of seeds for future books. Can you tell me a little bit, for everyone's benefit, what kind of research you did at Harvard during your stay, and how was the archival research kind of revelatory for you, and how it has changed you as changed your writing trajectory so far? That is, I think, I'm really interested in knowing more about that. And I know you found some really fascinating stuff about your family as well. So please tell us.
You know, the first thing I'll say about the Hutchins experience is, you know, the cohort of fellows is an unexpected treasure trove. You know, just the conversation in the corridors are like 10 times what you went there to do. You know, I'm not a historian by training. I'm a scientist by training. Writing was my hobby. It became my job. But I do have an interest in history because I have a very convoluted family history. You know, I carry a European name, which kind of hints at, you know, the intervention of the slave trade in my family's history. So I have family ties that go to Black loyalists in the US, to Nova Scotians in Canada, that go to the Caribbean in Jamaica and Guadeloupe. And it's all tied in there. And then within Africa itself as well, you know, Equatorial Guinea, Sierra Leone. So that's where my interest in history comes into play. But I also think because of that history, I realized, especially because I used to visit the United States a lot and do tours, you know, reading poetry and that kind of thing. And what I found was that actually, even though Africa has quite a large population of people who resettled from the New World, by various means. So you had Brazilians who were able to buy their freedom from slavery. You had Maroons who were drafted into the West Indies Regiment, who were then able to negotiate their freedom. The people who managed to escape by various means, got back to Africa. There are also people who went to study in the different mother countries, and then decided to settle in Africa. Now, because all of this is still trauma, what's happened with those families is they've settled as natives on the continent. And so nobody talks about those connections. So a lot of people's perception of Africa is just this place where nobody has any connection to the so-called New World, except, you know, this very anachronistic notion of you sold your brothers, that kind of thing. And so when I then say to people, well, actually my great-grandfather came from Jamaica, then they're like, oh, how is that possible? But, you know, the movement has been constant since the first ship, and it wasn't one ship, it's several ships. And so I was researching historic connections between Africa and the diaspora in the New World. But I was focusing on philosophy and skills, because one of the things that doesn't happen in the conventional way in which this is explored is, it's unspoken, but it's assumed, because if you're looking for history only in material elements, then the unspoken thing is that you're saying there's no thinking, there's no philosophy, there are no skills. And yet, actually, African people coming into the New World were generally headhunted for their skills. So they came to America's wealth is built off, people who knew how to extract dyes, who knew how to plant rice, who were metal workers. The Benin bronzes are not accidental. The people in the region that is now Benin and Nigeria were very skilled metal workers, also in Central Africa as well. So all of these people contributed to the development in the wealth of the New World. And yeah, so I wanted to explore based on skills and philosophy, and that's essentially what I went to do at Hutchins, which very revelatory. One of the things that it did teach me, because there was another historian who was looking at family history from New Orleans. One of the things that it did teach, because we had discussions about this, is that actually when Black people tell you stuff from oral history, you have to believe it, because when you go in the archives, very often it's exactly what they said. It's just that it wasn't written down. So one of the big takeaways for me is really to trust all of these kind of things that, the aunties and great aunts and great uncles tell you, because we're very good at recording history, even when it's not written down.
Do you see yourself writing another book or a novel or a short poetry collection on the basis of things that you have not used so far?
Well, I mean, so the poetry collection is ongoing, and that is very much that's an older collection. I'm working on a new one, which is where the newer work comes from.
Okay.
Which is very much linked to the research that I did at the Hutchins. But I feel like I'm definitely going to also do some nonfiction work. And I had the opportunity to visit a couple of islands in the Caribbean while I was at the Hutchins, and that was incredible as well. So in St. Lucia, for instance, I stayed with a lady called Auntie Mary, and she was telling me her grandmother was called Yaya and was Ashanti, and had come there after the initial kind of influx of enslaved Africans. So all of that is really interesting to kind of just mix up and complicate my notions and learning on Blackness in the New World, basically. So all of that, yeah, there's a lot over there.
That's
I picked
great.
up.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to read all of that. Your first collection was in 2010, and then I'm reading this now almost 13 years later, because this came out in 2020, but I'm sorry I'm reading it now because so I just got this book, but I'm reading this now. But I do see that there is a strong aspect in your poetry where one element is about storytelling. There's a narrative element to it. Would you like to speak a little bit about that? My question would be that when I met Sharon Olds and at a talk once, and then she said that her work is also narrative in character, and she said that she's obsessive about remembering it correctly to the point of that she wants to know what color the person was wearing. But of course, people who have been colonized, we don't have that luxury. Also, people who are writing about history and also looking at history in different ways. Your approach to history is often very speculative as well. How do you blend that element of storytelling in your work and in your poetry and then produce these poems? And how do you see yourself changing as a poet from that collection to this collection in terms of craft?
I mean, it's a very interesting question. I think as Black people, we're inheritors of the speculative, simply because our histories are often deliberately washed away, but also sometimes just fragmented because, the primary objective of the people who colonized and enslaved us was not to keep us together, to keep our families together. It was about their economic interests. So we're fragmented according to economic interests. Within my family, for instance, my extended family, there's my uncle Kofi Awuno, who changed his name from Williams to Awuno, basically hiding the wound. I've kept Parkes because I feel like if I'm wounded, let me be wounded. And let's, what can I then get from that? What is the absence of, because having that name means that I know that there are people missing that I cannot reach. How do I memorialize them? How do I celebrate them? How do I continue with the act of looking to recreate the family that was ripped apart? And I think because of that, the work is both storytelling and fantasy to some degree. I mean, it would be called fantasy, but it's speculation. So it's storytelling and speculation, but storytelling has an element of speculation anyway. So yeah, I'd say that the newer work has far more confidence in the speculation. In terms of the craft, I've embraced a lot more kind of connection to popular culture, because I also think that there's a way in which Blackness is braided into popular culture. And I would say that there's also a greater concern with just the vastness of the global Black diaspora, which, perhaps because I was raised in an Anglophone reality, initially my engagement with the diaspora is very Anglophone, but it's actually not the largest Black diaspora. We have the Hispanophone, so Spanish, Portuguese. So there's a larger engagement with that. And you see that in the titles, but also a celebration, very much a celebration of the language that became my language, which is Ga in Ghana, and the other, global Black languages, whether they're classed as patois or slang or whatever, they're all languages, that respond to a philosophy of being that's rooted in Africa.
I do see a bigger engagement, more intense engagement with the diaspora in your new work. It was there in your first work, but it did concern Ghana and Europe and the first poetry collection, and also a lot of personal history was there in the first collection. But in the new work, I do see, because of course you have also spent a lot of time now in the US, sometime at least more than before, there is an engagement, and I can see that you are embracing the stories and the inspiration and the heartbreak from the bigger diaspora a lot more. And that's really, really big, heartening to see. I also loved the way you actually arrange this collection in different sections, and those sections are divided into different thematics as well. And I wanted to ask you, could you read something from the section which is about love, and which is Eros? Any poems that you really love? Yeah.
Okay.
I think we love love.
Well, I'm gonna have to think about this.
I like Concise Geography of Heartbreak. I loved it most.
Okay. Well, I will read that then.
Yeah, thank you.
A Concise Geography of Heartbreak. Human. It starts from the skin, the same way Europeans came from the shore, smiling, setting up trading posts. When they whisper in your ears, nibble on your lobes, sending a shiver running through you, that's Stanley, pretending to be an explorer, but under contract to King Leopold. A finger runs down your chest, raising goosebumps, your lips lock, and your oil reserves run free. Environmental. You are learning a new language, every limb of your body possessed by the fire of this love that smelts gold, aluminium, copper, tin, and iron ore. You run when they ask, do for love things, making their lives easier. Meanwhile, they are with friends planning how to deceive you, use you, It's the Berlin Conference in kisses. They're all up inside you. You and your feelings, sappy as sliced rubber trees. Physical. You want to drop seeds and shit. Hell, maybe you do, one or two, until some night the forest fires start. It's like the worst kind of heartburn. All that BS you've swallowed. You start an independence movement, define limits, draw borders. They come pleading, they offer enticements. Ambassadors make compelling cases, seeding tears in your eyes. But once you've seen their true purpose, you can't unsee it. You must save your heart, even if it means you will hurt, even if the new country you carve is an assembly of broken things. It is yours. You will compose an anthem and sing it like an orgasm. You will sew a flag from fragments of new insight. Fly it as high as you hold your head.
Thank you so much. And this poem is also so classic you, because I mean, anyone who opens the collection would think this is a love poem. It is in the eros section, but it is about colonialism. It moves from the big, huge tectonic shifts in history from the personal to the political, and political to the personal. It blends. And I think that's why I liked it, because I think you are also that kind of a writer who constantly has a political lens, but at the same time, it never really steers away from the personal. Am I right?
That's true. I mean, it's I think, I mean, I mentioned Marvin earlier. Marvin Gaye can sing a song that's political and make it sound. But also I listen to a lot of Prince, and Prince can be like in the bedroom, in the shower, and the next moment it's like he's criticizing some world leader. And I really love that tension. And so, yeah, I think that kind of then reflects in the work that I do myself, because I do think that, Kwame Dawes used to run a workshop in England. And I remember going to one of his workshops, and one of the first poems he read of my, he's like, you do that thing where everything is connected. And I'd never thought about it before. But actually, that's how I've always lived my life. I've always felt like everything is connected. My mom used to get so mad at me because everything that would happen, like some beggar would be on the street, and I would say, well, maybe this happened. She's like, why do you have to have a story for them? They're just drinking. I'm like, well, I would always have that thing. So I think it was always there, but then also the artists I've consumed kind of have cemented that connection for me. I don't think any poem is ever just the surface. There's always more to it. And then, of course, the reader brings their own connection to it as well.
I think also in so many ways, many of us writers from the global South who has a history of colonialism, I think the most common people think in these many textures and many layers, I believe. There's an incredibly beautiful modernist poem in an Assamese language. It's basically about an aunt who is illiterate. Then she sits near the radio and hears that Patrice Lumumba has been assassinated. And then she goes back home worrying and crying, who's going to look after his children? And no idea whether he has children or not, but she's so worried and it ruins her whole day. So I think we don't always, global South people, history of colonialism, we are used to thinking in terms of wider community, in the wider global solidarity. And I see that global solidarity of intellectual solidarity as well as historical solidarity, in the way that your new work has developed. Especially, I think this is evident and if you would like to talk more about it, on the last section of this collection, where there are 8 poems that so much veer on the suffering of the Black diaspora, the history of Black Americans especially. And I think that's the biggest shift also I see in your 2 collections. And in between you wrote chapbooks, quite a few chapbooks as well, but I think this is a new thing, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to inhabit fully, first, to inhabit the label Black means that you are acknowledging that we live in a world system that makes commerce of Blackness, right? So when the moment you inhabit the descriptor of Black, then you're in a capitalist exploitative system. So at that moment, you have to realize your solidarity is with all people of color, because you are not considered by the system to be individuals. You are resources. And so the moment you inhabit that label, then it has to change the way you approach the world. And I think very much, I mean, I inhabited that very young, but in terms of my intellectual and literary output, I'm doing it more and more, because I also realize how urgent it is, because what young people read influences how they're going to shift the world. I don't think change is going to happen in our lifetime, but we sure as hell must write very, very hard to make sure that there's enough to get the generations coming moving quicker, get a head start to fight the power, so to speak.
No, absolutely. And I'm nodding my head as you speak, because that's really true and so well said. And I also feel sometimes that if you are coming from a underrepresented literary culture, sometimes we don't even have the option to write something else, that people who are from the mainstream can sit down and write an erotic thriller and have fun with it. Sometimes some of us don't have the choice, because it is a sense of, we are driven by a sense of duty and a responsibility for the new generation to come, and also as an homage to the earlier generation who has paved the path to do the current work. We are at 12:40, and I want to remind everybody that we are taking questions directly for the author and poet. Please feel free to question. The moderators will definitely read out those questions, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I going back to the Prince reference, I still think we can write any genre. We just have to transform it to suit what we need.
Absolutely.
And we can bring urgency to what people see as frivolous. And there's no reason why, because we've been so beaten upon, that we shouldn't experience joy. I am like radically committed to joy every single day. So I'm like, you can try whatever you're going to try. I'm still going to be joyful. I'm still going to be fighting you, but I'm still going to be joyful.
Yeah. And I think most of the writers that you and I love, who are deeply political, deeply subversive, are also supremely humorous. They always have a comic vision of the world, the way they write, small things they find funny, So it is the commonality among great writing and great writers who are socially, politically engaged. So I absolutely agree with you, and also agree with you because I just returned from Minnesota. It was already very cold there, and I had to wear my overcoat. And then people were talking about Prince because of something else. So it's kind of a strange feeling to hear you talk about his work. Is there a question here? Okay. Well, we wait for, sorry, Krishna.
No, people can raise their hand, use that icon, go and ask a question. I think there's one from Damaris. Damaris, you can speak. We could unmute you.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, please.
Please excuse any filth and dirt that you see in my house. A throw across the couch. But this is a question about your archival emphasis on the philosophies and skills of Black commodified bodies. I heard you talk about the Americas, Africa, and the Caribbean. I didn't hear you talk about any of the European countries that participated in the slave trade, but what archives did you play in the most? Like for me, a lot of what I'm thinking about is coming up in the archives of the business school. I don't understand anything about business.
Yes. Well, I mean, but this ties in with sorry, is that the end of the question?
Yes.
I wasn't. Yeah. It ties in with what I just said about blackness and commodity. That's why you find most of the records in the business school. Why I didn't mention Europe is because I don't necessarily want to center Europe in conversations about blackness. I know everybody knows who the aggressors are. We speak English, we speak Spanish, we speak Portuguese. So, like, I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that they are, and very deliberately so, because I read some of the things that I was reading were the journals of Europe, the first European visitors to Africa, and how their tone's completely different from what we are then later told. You know, so these are people like Alvise de Cadamosto traveling on the coast of Africa and saying, these are the most amazing swimmers I've ever seen, or, you know, talking about people's hospitality and stuff like that. And then you go, you know, a century later, and these people have no skills, talents, you know, this is what is sold to us later. So it's a very, very deliberate, systemic and systematic process. The reason why the business archives give you more is because when people want rewards, they're always truthful. So somebody will say, the person I've enslaved has no skills, but when the person goes missing and they want insurance money, they'll say he's a blacksmith. It means that you can get more money back. So one of the fellows we were with, gosh, I've suddenly forgotten his name, but he was looking at insurance records.
John Clegg.
John Clegg, there you go. Was looking at insurance records, and it's so revealing. It's similar. We had Jorge as well, who was looking at Mexico, and he was talking about how the cost, just to understand the commodification, the cost of an enslaved person was the equivalent of, I think, buying a house. And that's, they knew how much labor they would get out of one person. So that's why you see the stuff in the business, because we were commodity. You know, they weren't interested in recording, you know, except to kind of make mockery of or to make entertainment of. They weren't interested in the social lives. It's really about, you know, what is your economic worth? You know, I think it was Barbados. I think in some of the plantations where one of the plantation owners was talking about when they have a pregnant woman, they'd rather work her to death than take her off so that the child can be born, because the cost of taking her off and also nursing the child so they can work, it just meant that, you know, they just wouldn't. So that's genocidal, basically. So yeah, I could go on. I'm not going to. Yeah, so I'm not surprised that that's where you get the most interesting information.
Anybody has a question, please feel free to ask. I'm really dying to ask, Nii, if you'd like to talk a little bit about the new poetic form that you have invented, and you're using a lot more in this collection. Could you please tell us a little bit about it for those who don't know about it, and also the gimbal? Am I pronouncing this correctly? And maybe you can also comment on how this form enables you to sort of explore your own artistic and the political interest and vision.
So, I mean, when we talk about form, we even go right down to language, right? There's a reason why in every space in the New World where Africans have been taken, they've adapted the languages, the colonial languages, because those languages were not enough to encompass their philosophies. So we start from a linguistic, you know, when we talk about form, we start really from a linguistic base. And then the thing with the gimbal was I had been trying for years. My father died 30 years ago, you know, a long, long time ago. And I'd been trying to find, I'd written a couple of poems about losing my father, but I never felt like I'd found the balance, the right balance. And so I was playing around with ideas, and I started to look at culturally how we deal with grief. And one of the things that happens, and you see this in the Caribbean, you have your 9 nights and stuff, people come and sit around and, you know, you address the family. So one of the things that I found really tiresome, but later realized its use, when my father died is we had to sit down and people would come and greet us. And then we had to tell the story of how we lost him. And it's incredibly painful when you start, but after a while, you get used to doing it. So it's almost like it helps you to begin to process the grief. So there's this element of repetition. But also what I found was in the first kind of iterations of it, you would kind of gush and then you'd pause and then you might say a line, you know, you'd have a moment of clarity and then you might gush again. And so the gimbal in the end mimics that kind of gush and clarity and gush and clarity. And taken from my own sort of inclination, which I inherited from my father. Like I said, I'm trained as a scientist. My father was as well. My mother's a nurse. I come from a family of scientists who consumed art. So what I did with the gimbal was to try and go with my natural inclination, which is to try and analyze things before I let my emotions come in. And so the gimbal kind of goes from logical to emotional. And there's a turn in the middle. So there are 3 single lines, which are the moments of clarity. The central one, the right in the middle of the poem, is a pivot. So it's kind of 5 lines, 1 line, 4 lines, 1 line, 4 lines, 1 line, 5 lines. And so that pivot, that line, is where the shift happens from logic to emotion, but also that line is really where it's like, oh, this is what I'm dealing with right here. So the one I read, Gimbal of Blackness, that line is, a man now lifeless though he gave me life, right? So it's kind of like, I'm accepting that, you know, he's gone, but I'm also celebrating that I'm here. So that's really, you know, the turn. And I played with that to kind of write about grief. But what I realized that eventually, after I wrote that poem, which was the first one, was that it was actually useful for me to write about emotional stuff, not just grief, but love, desire, all of that. And so then I wrote a few more poems in the form, heartbreak, you know, all of that stuff. But yeah, I had to muscle philosophy into, you know, the philosophy of kind of how a society deals with loss and grief into creating the form. And so I think it's been very freeing.
Mm-hmm.
And I often encourage poets to kind of play around and find their own form, because all of the forms that we revere were experiments that, you know, young European boys were kind of playing around with. You know, the sonnet is just some English boys trying to like muscle an Italian form into English.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be one of the classic forms, and like, don't break the rules. Of course I'm going to break the rules. It's just some kids that did it and we turned it into rules. So yeah.
No, I think the form also is I felt that the form right now as you're using is enabling you to articulate challenging stuff, both emotionally, not just trauma, but also it is also about the bigger trauma, the global trauma of the Black diaspora, and the emotions during the BLM and all of those things. I think has seeped into the development of the form that you're taking in. So I'm really fascinated, you know, the way you are kind of reshaping the form. I think and the people grieve in different cultures in very differently, you know. And what you said really resonated with me, because that's how we grieve back home in India. People would come and ask you the same things again. You're never really left alone, you know. So I think I'm so glad that you're doing this, and the form, I hope, gets he's used widely, you know, to explore the inarticulate. And in so many ways, it is also performing, it becomes a textual equivalent of the inability to say, but also how we arrived at eventually saying what we can't say with great difficulty.
Yeah. One of the things that's really interesting to me is when you look at the global South, there are so many things that are done similarly. And I think that really comes from a very fundamental separation between the global South and what we know now as the Western world, which is that there's a deep respect for nature, right? We don't feel like we're here to dominate our surroundings. We're here to kind of live and integrate. And that changes how you respond to people, to plants, everything. The way you exploit natural resources, all of those things. You know, I wrote a children's book, and I had to put a note in the back to emphasize that we did not have kind of extinction emergencies in Africa until European trophy hunters came. And also European commercial farmers who destroyed large amounts of habitats just to grow, you know, wheat or whatever they wanted to grow. So all of these things happen because a different philosophy, which is like we have dominion and we're just going to exploit and we're just going to make profit, changes things. But there is definitely resonance. When I visited Latin America, Mexico, you know, Peru, I found very similar, very similar ways of kind of dealing with humanity, grief, in the way people relate to each other in everyday life as well. Yeah.
If anyone has a question, please feel free to just jump in. But we only have 3 more minutes. But Nii, what you have said here, it reminds me of the Nutmeg Curse by Amitabh Ghosh, where he talks about an incident where one of the native chiefs refused to sign a contract with the colonizers because the Earth's opinion was not taken into account. And it's really sort of resonated and stayed with me when I read the book.
Yeah. I mean, similar to, you know, accounts we've heard of the Native Americans.
Yes.
When, you know, they were being asked to sign these contracts, and they found it ridiculous.
Yeah.
Be buying land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Krishna, do you want to say anything to wrap it up, or you would like me to do that?
May I ask a quick question?
Please, please.
And this both of you have kind of covered, but I assume, I mean, you have read each other's poetry, and I wonder what kind of intersections you have found, both in terms of form or content, or what you have found in each other's poetry as to push your own creativity, to push forward your own writing.
Aruni, are you answering first?
Sure. Okay. I think one thing I've learned from Nii's poetry is I'm not a very good scansion person. I'm not very good at meter, and I really admire the way Nii is able to do that. But what I learned, especially from reading his first poet collection, and also now as well, is the tendency to tell stories, the narrative quality of it, and I really sort of found it very useful to me, because I just think that I'm a storyteller in any mode, and I like to tell stories. And I think that even my poems are stories. In fact, my poems are verse narratives. They are fictionalized and dramatized from the reality. Also, it has some kind of archival and field research associated with it. But it's an aspect of storytelling. That's what I learned the most and found the most fascinating and useful.
I mean, I would say, I mean, I met Aruni at Jaipur Literary Festival in 2007, right?
2007, yes.
Yeah, 2007. So, you know, I've known him a long time. And I think the thing that he was just a student then, interested in writing, but I recognized this kind of passion for storytelling. And what I gleaned from our conversations was really how important it can be for a work of art, how much of a shift can happen if you alter the perspective even the slightest bit. I did not know of the Assamese people because, you know, India, there's an India brand, and the India brand often doesn't include, you know, the Assam. Even, I mean, given the huge literary culture of the Bengali, you don't actually see a lot of that. You know, until I went to Kolkata Book Festival, and like I bought a Neruda volume that was Spanish and Bengali, and I bought it just because I'm like, it just excludes English, and I just wanted to have it. But that's really what I took away from that encounter, and that has bled into my work since then. Is just all these like little shifts in perspective to illuminate the work. that's essentially what I have inherited from my relationship with Aruni. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's very kind.
Well, thank you both for an invigorating, inspiring conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Krishna, for a question as well. That was a great question, and thank you everyone for attending and asking me to do this. It's been a great pleasure, of course.
And we hope to see both of you here at the Hutchins Center.
I hope so. I hope so.
You know me, where there's food, I will turn up. So I will be there. I will be there one of these days soon. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.